It's so wonderful to see all of you here, so many familiar faces, also some new ones. I look forward to getting to know all of you as I continue to step into this role at the foundation. And I'm just so honored to be a part of this Morehead-Cain community as we close our 75th year here at the foundation in Chapel Hill. As I reminded everyone yesterday, the 76th anniversary of the John Motley Morehead's trust indenture is this coming Sunday, which is pretty neat. I had my first meeting with the trustees about 2.5 weeks ago. And at that meeting, I opened with a reflection actually on the many ways that college had changed since I enrolled in college 25 years ago. And the amazing thing about this is that I'm convinced that the pace of change will accelerate. The pressures of finances, the demands for access, pace of technology, and the pandemic, which has pushed our students last year off of campus and into their living rooms and bedrooms across the state and around the world, has highlighted the need for some changes while accelerating the pace of others. A core part of Uncle Mott's aspiration in establishing the foundation was to enhance the excellence of his beloved university, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I think we all know that that university is facing immense pressure in many directions, pressure to change and evolve with the times and to meet the demands of the state, the country, and the world in the 21st century and beyond. Over the year ahead, we'll be pursuing a strategic planning process, and we'll be exploring ways in which we expect our university must evolve over the years ahead, and asking questions as to how we need to evolve as Morehead-Cain and as a program in order to support, to advance, or to respond to the changing nature of university in the 21st century. And so for me, this conversation this afternoon is really exciting because it's a way to kick that exploration off by bringing 3 esteemed alumni in higher education together for a conversation about the post-pandemic university. And I'll ask each of the 3 to introduce themselves, describing the role that they hold today, sharing their class year, and perhaps one idea from your time as a Morehead-Cain Scholar at UNC that you've taken forward into your career in higher ed. So Patrick, may I ask you to go first?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick Methvin, class of 2001, 20th this year. I'm the director of the U.S. Higher Education Strategy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The idea I take with me from my time as a Morehead-Cain Scholar is that into the work today, I think is that, higher education, when done well, some of the most powerful parts of your education happen outside of the classroom.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Robyn Hadley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Robyn Hadley, Vice President and Chief Student Affairs Officer at the University of Virginia, class of 1985. And probably the thing that I take from my Morehead-Cain experience, besides the friendships, is travel, travel, travel.
Fantastic. Opens to many questions about the role of a campus in the future of higher education. Finally, Rafael.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Rafael Martin. I am currently the Vice President and Chief of Staff at the University of Texas at Dallas, class of 91. And I guess the biggest takeaway from my experience at Carolina, I had the great pleasure to be on the varsity fencing team for 4 years at Carolina, and under the leadership of Ron Miller, who was coach there for 53 years, if you can believe it, an amazing individual. And really what I learned from that experience was to really try to learn and take away as much as you can from everybody that you encounter. Ron Miller probably taught me more than any of my faculty members, all due respect to them, from my experience at Carolina. And so I've taken that forward with me and just look for the opportunity to learn from everybody that I encounter.
Thanks, Rafael. I must say I am learning new things from Morehead-Cain alumni and scholars every single day. The scholars prove to be wonderful teachers when they enter our office, which is great. So as we explore this conversation, I'd love to start with an exploration of the purpose of a college education. Why do we go to college? And I thought, as a background to this, I should start by noting that I recently had a conversation with one of the heads of arguably, I think, the most prestigious school in North Carolina, a school in Charlotte, private school. And I asked what ideas he had for Morehead-Cain. He said, above all, I wish Morehead-Cain could do a job of helping us articulate to students, like the students at our school, why they're going to college at all. His perception was that Morehead-Cain scholars seem to make the most of a college experience, but that many of the students that he interacted with every single day have the expectation of attending to college, but little sense of why they're going to college. And so, Robyn, I'd love to start with you. You've taken leadership roles at universities across the country. How do you describe the purpose of higher education in these times?
Thank you for the question. And I have to first say, I think that one of the outcomes of being in the Morehead community is you find yourself in places you never ever dreamed of. And I can assure you that being the Vice President and Chief Student Affairs Officer of anything was not on my to-do list at 18, much less 22. So having said that, I think the purpose of a college education among many things is for as many individuals as possible, regardless of station, to be able to secure all of the skills, tools, and resources that they can by putting themselves in challenging positions to learn and do more, and putting themselves in environments with people they often disagree with, so that they can learn more about the possibilities of humankind. And I know that may be a kind of high-level definition of that purpose, but I hope that it encompasses my belief that universities, particularly flagship public universities, should be ones that are as accessible as possible, recognizing that K through 12 systems across the state of North Carolina and across this country are not equitably funded, and that first-year students that land on university doorsteps come in differentially prepared. And at the end of the day, it should be our universities, particularly public universities' responsibilities to figure out how we can continue to maintain a democratic society, and at the same time help people, again, secure the skills, tools, and resources to solve some of the biggest problems that we have.
Thank you, Robyn. Skills, tools, and resources, I think takes me into a question for Patrick, setting the scene across the country. And Patrick, in recent years, studies have come out that have shared evidence that many students graduate from university in this country without measurable gains in critical thinking or communication skills, but with substantial debts. And this has fueled the tertiary reform movement in many ways. It's made it, I think, more intensely focused on badging and career readiness. But I don't think many scholars would describe the purpose of their time at UNC as readiness for a specific career. In your work at Gates Foundation, you talk about post-secondary success. And I'd love to hear what does success look like when you describe post-secondary success? How do universities prepare students for success?
So, some of the research you're talking about is stuff that we funded, so that is very approximate to my work. And I would agree, kind of, Chris, underneath that, with the assertion that most of our scholars wouldn't describe their purpose of their time at UNC for career readiness. Although I can tell you that on freshman drop-off day, my parents looked me in the eye and said, "Do not come back without a JOB," right? So and maybe that's about the station of life I was in, which it was not a luxury to go to higher education and self-actualize or any of these other things. It was like, you do need some of the things that Robyn just talked about, right? That said, I do want to acknowledge, it is such a privileged position that Morehead-Cain scholars are in to not have job or income first and foremost in their minds. This is due to a combination of having a full ride, so not having to worry about debt, which is the case for the majority of students in this country, and adding just a tremendous asset to their resume, right? The Morehead-Cain, the experiences, the network, all of those things. In addition to that, a decent percentage also have a bit of a safety net from their own family financial background. So, you compare that to what the country is talking about, where the average US graduate leaves with about $30,000 in debt. This is exacerbated for Black, Latino, and Indigenous students. I mean, put it another way, in some cases, higher education is creating negative wealth in certain communities. I say that because that's the broader societal and political backdrop in which we are having this conversation. For years, legislators talking about college thought about the kinds of tree-lined quads that you see in Chapel Hill, right? And now they're realizing that's actually not the experience for the vast majority of students these days, right? And so the discourse in the environment is changing. I believe, and I have the data, to back this up, that higher education not only advances economic gains, but also personal health, well-being, civic participation, and many other things. I also believe from a consumer protection perspective, though, that there should be a baseline expectation on that economic front from institutions. For instance, the research, some of which you might be familiar with from citing, that we've conducted is that 750 out of 4,000 Title IV receiving colleges in this country leave their average graduate actually no better off 10 years after graduation than if they would have gone straight into the labor market after high school. Okay, that's after a lot of personal time and resource investment, right? So UNC Chapel Hill, and much less Morehead-Cain, it certainly is not going to find itself in that position. We're nowhere even close to that world. In some ways, the Morehead-Cain experience is what one would hope for all of higher education, right? That scholars have an opportunity to get a great education in the classroom, that they have chances to stretch their wings from a leadership perspective, engage and learn from diverse perspectives, opportunity to grow professionally, leave with great social capital, and all of that with little to no debt. That, for me, Chris, would be like, that would be student success if we could offer that at scale. But those are the things I think of. As for the badging comment in the so-called skilling movement, just a couple things there. To some degree, those actually reflect a movement to lifelong learning, as opposed to replacing the current undergrad experience. And that's going to be the reality as these sectors turn over faster and faster due to technology. In fact, most of the boot camps that are highly publicized that you hear about, they're actually serving folks who already have a degree, right? So they're people who already have an AA or a BA. The vast majority of these successful boot camps, like the coding and all of that stuff. From an undergrad perspective, though, I do think there are a lot of things these programs leave on the table. And I think we would be in not a great place if we as a society move more towards that space. Some of the critical thinking skills, other things that help people adjust when life throws them a curveball. So you're going to see some short-term gains economically from those, but longer term, the picture is not quite as clear. Last, you asked about liberal arts specifically. I think underneath the kind of broader assumption about college, I actually think there's a very important role for liberal arts to play in the future of higher education. In the past 6 to 10 years, I think we've seen that more than ever in history, that we need critical thinkers with many different thinking paradigms. The Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce did a study of European countries and found an inverse relationship between education levels and propensity towards totalitarian regimes. And that was even higher inverse relationships for those who had what over in Europe is deemed basically the equivalent of a liberal arts degree. So I think we need that holistic education that UNC Chapel Hill offers now more than ever. So I will say last, on an economic perspective, we are just now starting to see researchers linking college and degree programs to economic outcomes. Rafael, actually, the UT system is probably the most advanced in the country with the data that you guys have. And I think you're going to see researchers making connections to different patterns of class taking even below the major level. Early analysis are showing from some labor economists that point to a sweet spot of people who are doing kind of a dual major type approach, where there's liberal arts on one side and one that's oriented towards like specific skills and professional needs off of the other. They're seeing that as the sweet spot just for economic gain, not to mention some of these other elements we were talking about. So I think from a bottom line, Morehead-Cain is in a good position in relationship to the purpose of education. In many cases, I think the question is how Morehead-Cain scholars and the program help make UNC that experience for even more of their classmates, helping them experience the joy of discovery, helping them experience some of the things that happen outside of the classroom. I think that's pretty evident that the program is doing that right now. And the question is, can we lean in even more?
It's fantastic as an overview of, really such a powerful canon that you and your team have built over the course of the past several years around higher ed, which I've loved reading and working through. And I thank you for the work you've done. You mentioned dual majors, and it's interesting, Patrick, each time I've seen our chancellor, Kevin Guskowitz, he has made a point of reminding me that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has more dual majors than any other public flagship in the country. And it's a point that he's immensely proud of because of the implications from some of the research that you've described. And you talked about the UT system, which takes us to Rafael. Rafael, you had a bird's eye view of a university's response to the pandemic. And as you moved online and to Zoom class during the pandemic, what was lost at UT Dallas? And was anything gained?
Yes. I mean, I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. We definitely did see a loss in student engagement in the online environment. It was, the reports we get back from our faculty members were that, yes, you get students showing up to class, but they'd have their video off and they wouldn't have the same level of interaction or engagement in the online environment that they do in the face-to-face environment. And, in some cases, and in a lot of cases, because of the pandemic and because not all of our students were able to access courses synchronously. So a faculty member might be offering, their lecture or their lesson online at the scheduled class time, but a lot of our students didn't necessarily have access to high-speed internet. And at the times that class was going on. So we had to offer asynchronous options. And that even lessened the engagement that students had with faculty members. The other challenge that we had, because we basically took the university virtual shortly after spring break of last year, and kept it that way for the next 2 semesters. The challenge of teaching an organic chemistry lab online, right, was not something that any of us contemplated when we started that effort, and certainly not one that we thought we were going to have to sustain for the better part of a year. So we definitely lost in terms of engagement, and not just the engagement of students in terms of the learning outcomes, but as I'm sure many of you have heard, there is I will use the word crisis, and I think it is appropriate, a crisis of kind of mental health amongst our college students across the country. And I think, the pandemic definitely, if it did not precipitate it, it definitely accelerated it, and exposed where we need to do a better job of engaging with our students and providing resources for our students as it relates to their mental health. It has been a chronically under-resourced area on college campuses, and I think one thing that we have learned from the pandemic is that we need to provide better resources, more robust resources in that area for our students. One of the benefits, of being virtual is that we've learned that we can provide a lot of those services that we used to provide exclusively face-to-face virtually, and often much more efficiently than we had in the past. But it also brings its own set of challenges, like coming back to the counseling. So yes, now we can provide virtual counseling to our students, except that if we have students that are living in Oklahoma or Arkansas while they're taking virtual classes, well, guess what? Our counselors who are licensed for Texas can't provide those counseling services to those students. So now we have to find alternative care providers to be able to provide for those students who may be not living locally or in the state of Texas. I think the other things that we've learned are that there's an appetite for more online options from our students, that they would like to have those online courses as options, but that we have to think very carefully about pedagogy when we're talking about online education. It is not enough to have a faculty member sitting at their desk like we all are here and simply lecturing to a bunch of small video boxes. That does not work pedagogically in the same way that a live face-to-face classroom environment does. And so we have to engage with our colleagues who have given some more thought to online pedagogy and how to structure online classes to be able to effectively provide the learning outcomes that we need our students to have to be successful.
Thanks for that. I mean, I became so deeply aware as you were talking, just the volume of work that faced college administrators, faculty members, and support staff over the course of this transition. And I hope that we will have the opportunity to stop and catalog some of our learning. I'd love, before we move on to some questions about who the public university serves, I'd love to hear any additional thoughts or plugs that you might have for us as a staff or for the alumni community on how Morehead-Cain might show the way with respect to the future of college education and allowing colleges to fulfill their purpose. And that's a question to any of you.
I think for me, one aspect of what colleges or universities communities do, or university communities do, is to level the playing field. And I know that means different things to different people. But again, you heard in my opening remarks, travel, travel, travel. I mean, I came from a little bitty town of 8,000 people, and it was just amazing to think of what the scholarship would open in terms of opportunity, both domestically and internationally. And so I've just often thought about all of the footage, the video footage and pictures and other kinds of things that we either have individually or we might have submitted, and if or how there is some way to organize those resources so that they could be used by public libraries or by public schools, in ways that might not be the case in a place like Graham, Alamance County, where I came from, where teachers are doing the very best that they can, but trying to make those connections beyond those counties or communities or the state are difficult. So I've often wondered if there's a way for us to use some of our media resources, again, through video or other kinds of things. I know many of you are already involved in volunteering in schools, you're speakers in schools, or you're involved in schools in some form or fashion, but are there other ways we can amplify the impact we have had in these, what I imagine are just light bulb goes off moments as we're standing at the top of a peak during Outward Bound, or we are getting our feet level for the very first time on the Great Wall of China, as I had the opportunity to do. So that's something that I have always thought about. And I also say that too, because my history and social studies teachers were so incredibly important in my high school experience in terms of helping me see the world of possibilities out there beyond Alamance County.
Well, Chris, I guess I would answer this, and I know, I know Patrick is going to have some things to say about this as well, but we are engaged in higher education in a great experiment right now. And that experiment is how to assess candidates, applicants to our institutions without the benefit of standardized testing, in large part, right? I'm sure most of you have heard, the University of California system has decided to eliminate standardized testing from its selection criteria. Most universities across the nation right now are at the very least test optional in terms of SAT, ACT scores for their admissions process. And that has been a cornerstone, of admissions for many, many years, for decades now. And the pandemic has essentially forced us to reassess that, because many students simply did not have access to those tests during the pandemic. And we still had to, take applications and admit those students. So we are in the process of looking at, how we can evaluate students more comprehensively without the use of those standardized test scores. We're not here to talk about standardized testing and some of the problems associated with it, but I think this is a great opportunity to address some of the things that Robyn referred to earlier in terms of the inequities that may have been baked in to utilizing standardized test scores as evaluation criteria. But the Morehead-Cain programs like we have here at UT Dallas, the McDermott program, have the resources to experiment in a way that we as an institution may not be able to do. And so, that's what I would hope, and I think you guys have been doing over the years, is trying new things, seeing, what gives you the type of information that you think is valuable in selecting students for the program, and hopefully that we can apply on a larger scale at the institutional level.
That takes us into some really interesting questions about who the public university should serve. And I think that we have a powerful opportunity at Morehead-Cain to serve as an innovation engine, both in selection, but also in programming, and asking how would we enable the types of Morehead-Cain experiences that Patrick talked about? What would it look like for every student at UNC Chapel Hill, or indeed every student at a university in America, to have those types of experiences? Because I don't know that we fundamentally have to be on top of the Great Wall of China, although I would never argue with the value of that experience in order to have transformational education, which I think is really exciting.
And I would also like to suggest, I think, to Patrick's point, that for me has been very important in thinking about student success at the higher ed level and also at the K through 12 level. Is that very often when we think about how we support, for example, first gen or low income students coming from rural communities or historically underrepresented students, we tend to talk about what they don't have or what their deficits are when they come into the university. And what I have tried to do at my former institution, and now as we're beginning to scale some of this work, is I try to start with the question, what is the penultimate student experience at the institution? Well, Morehead-Cain is very likely one, if not the penultimate student experience at UNC Chapel Hill. And when I say student experience, I mean the activities in the classroom as well as outside the classroom. And so what I wonder is, are there opportunities for Morehead to take some of those 4 or 5 nuggets, if you will, those things that are very basic in the Morehead experience, and understand with the College of Arts and Sciences or other entities that support the undergraduate experience, and say, how can we make elements of this experience accessible for every student? For every student. If I can just give you, this is a very simple example here, but here, for example, in Charlottesville, the 3rd year ceremony is very important. I got to participate in it. So the picking up of the class ring is very, very important. Well, not everybody can afford a class ring. So you say to yourself, if that is a true community tradition, we should figure out how to make sure every 3rd year student has a class ring. If that's really part of being a citizen in our community, if that's part of school spirit, if that's a part of the experience, what are those things? Whether it's an internship or research with a faculty member for a summer or a semester, what are those key things that we can strive to ensure that every student has access to? And if we strive to make sure more students have access to the experience just like the students who have a full ride, then I think we can figure out how to do a better job for all of our students across the board.
You're here. I love that. I love that challenge. I'd love to pick up, because you're talking about access, you're talking about students. I think we should explore who a flagship public university like UNC Chapel Hill should serve, and jump into some of the questions that Rafael raised. At Morehead-Cain, we're identifying young people with leadership potential, right? But UNC Chapel Hill has a profound public mission. Patrick, we know COVID disrupted so many of the university admissions practices as Rafael described. What opportunities do you think that's created? And what risks has it created?
So first, I would not want to be the dean of admissions over the past few years of any institution. And to that regard, someone should get our director of recruitment and selection, Tim Chaney, a very large fruit basket this holiday season, or maybe multiple, for his creativity and hustle over the past couple of years. So the story, Chris, is really quite mixed regarding COVID disruptions in enrollment and selection. So as a sector, just for context, before we get back into like Chapel Hill and Morehead-Cain, like fall 2020 enrollment, freshman enrollment dropped 16% compared to 2019, 16%. Fall 2021, the class that, that's on campus now, we saw another 3 to 4% drop in freshman enrollment, but this played out very differently across sectors, right? Where interestingly, highly selective private institutions, freshman enrollment grew 11 points this past year, with state flagships slightly behind that, but also in the growth space, whereas community colleges continue to get slammed by double digits, right? So when we zero in on the selective institutions, that question that Robyn raised about access, you start wondering, like, is the fact that the nation is in the middle of a racial reckoning, is that going to see greater access and diversity of classes? Is the removal of things like Rafael mentioned, standardized testing, things like that, is that going to see that? Well, so here's what we know. We have seen some increases in class diversity, with about 20% of the freshman class is Pell eligible in the classes of Penn and Harvard. That's record for both of those institutions. Dartmouth saw a record of 17% first generation students in this freshman class, and Brown admitted 55% of its class identified as students of color, compared to 36% the prior year. Okay. The highly competitive University of California system also admitted its most racially diverse class in history. Now, is that due to standard admissions practice testing that, such as increases in test optional or test blind? That's to be determined. I actually think what we're seeing is a bit of a blip, and we're going to see what's really happening over the next 4 to 5 years. We do know that 89% of colleges went test optional for this class, the 2021, compared to 77% for fall 2020. And that's way, way up from 2019, right? So some places like the UC system have already committed to not going back to the old way. And so what does that mean for UNC and Morehead-Cain? I would argue that in the very near term, it's going to have a greater impact on Morehead-Cain than UNC. Mostly because Morehead-Cain was already leaning into more creative selection processes that are allowing us to find future scholars who might not have been seen as quickly through some of the scaled algorithms at these elite institutions. And some of those institutions were forced to catch up, frankly, with our creativity on the selection front. For UNC, in the very near term, I see slightly less immediate impact because they're doing these things at scale. They can lean heavier on things like GPA, where they know what GPAs mean at certain high schools and things like that. So they can reweight their criteria a little bit, in addition to, I'm sure it is absolutely crazy at the admissions office there. Longer term, though, I think over the next few years, I think this is going to increase the variation in admissions processes everywhere. And this is where Morehead-Cain has additional opportunity. All right, we can leverage a dedicated, actually a few things. We can be faster and more nimble. There's no question about that. In our experimentation on the selection front, we can leverage a dedicated alumni group for conversion activities. You don't see alumni engagement like Morehead-Cain at the elite institutions. Like it's not the same. And then I think actually we're going to see increased use of alumni in our conversion activities, right? We do a pretty good job with that. But I think when you look at students putting in more applications to more places, then the conversion is going to be a big, big deal. So how do we enroll those folks who we admit? And I think the alumni have a big role to play in that. I also think, just finally, and this gets a little bit to that question of how can the Morehead-Cain students and scholars, how can they participate? I actually think we could do a better job tapping our current scholars to be creative about spotting potential in different ways. So, we've now mentioned taking really an asset-based frame on finding talent, as opposed to like a selection process where you're looking at deficits along the way and eliminating out. That's not the way this generation thinks, right? This generation is thinking from an asset-based view. So it's like, how do you spot the brilliance and what do you do with that? And I think Morehead-Cain does a pretty good job with that. But I think actually generationally, the younger folks in our scholars are going to tell us more about how to do that over time. So I'd love to see us engage there, as well as with the admissions department just down the street for UNC Chapel Hill.
That's so interesting to me, Patrick, in the context of my past work at African Leadership Academy, where we were trying to identify the most promising young leaders from all over the African continent. Each year, approximately 10% of our students who would ultimately make it through the funnel would have been nominated by other students who were at ALA. And many of them were not school classmates. They were students that they had come across in different spaces that they thought were really impressive because they saw the assets that they would bring to the school community. I think a really interesting push for us to imagine how we would leverage our own student body, our own alumni as a network of talent scouts, and how do we think about who we serve in that regard. Robyn, Rafael, after this, we'll send it out to questions from the audience because I'm sure they have many, but you each work at flagship publics, and I'd love to hear how the conversation about who your university should serve and does serve is evolving and where you think it should go.
Well, first of all, Chris, the people in Austin might argue with you about whether or not UT Dallas is a flagship institution, but we like to think of ourselves like that, as an emerging flagship institution. But it actually, it brings up an interesting point. My feeling is that a public university is here to serve the people of the state, right? And to that extent, we should, as much as possible, look like the population of the state. And for the most part, public universities and universities in general do not look like the populations. The demographic profile of our student body does not look like the demographic profile of our states. And we have a lot of work to do. And part of the reason for that is, in a state like Texas, where we've had tremendous demographic growth, right? The population growth of the past few decades has just been phenomenal here. We are seriously under-resourced in terms of top-tier, high-quality public academic institutions, right? We have 3 public R1 institutions in the state: Texas A&M, University of Texas in Austin, UT Dallas. And we have a couple of others that are emerging, including a couple of others in the UT system, UT Arlington and El Paso and San Antonio, University of North Texas. But by and large, when people think about flagship institutions in the state of Texas, they're talking about A&M and they're talking about the UT Austin. And what that has created is in an environment where, because we don't have the capacity for the top students in our state to come to our public institutions, they're getting poached by Oklahoma, by Arkansas, by Louisiana, right? Who are offering those students, if you are in the top 10% of your graduating class of a Texas high school, you will get in-state tuition in Oklahoma. You will get in-state tuition in Arkansas, right? So our lack of capacity means that we're not able to retain and serve the students that we've been built to serve. The other thing that dynamic has created, if I look at our institutions critically, is that it has allowed us to become a little lazy, frankly, because we can be selective, because we know that those top 10, there are always more top 10% students, there are always more high quality students out there applying to our institution than we know that can be served. Then we don't have to work that hard to seek out those students who may not come to our institution, who may not have the resources, right, to know about how to apply to college, et cetera. UT Dallas sits in the northern suburbs of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, fairly affluent. We have a pipeline from the northern suburban, well-resourced high schools into our freshman class, right? We do not have the same sort of pipeline from the school districts to the east and south that are more heavily concentrated in underrepresented student populations, right? And we have not made the investment because, frankly, we haven't had to. And that's on us. I mean, we need to do better if we are going to serve the people of our state, because it is our responsibility to go and meet them where they are, in my opinion. And we have not done enough to do that. And so one of the things we're trying right now as an institution is to say, okay, we know that some of these underrepresented populations don't necessarily always apply in time for some of the deadlines for some of our merit-based and even some of our need-based programs. So we've put in place a new program, we're calling the Top 10% program, which says even after that deadline passes, if you are in the top 10% of your graduating class at any Texas high school, right, we are going to offer you at least a partial scholarship to help defray some of the costs come to UTD. And the early indications are that the students that we're attracting with that scholarship offer are more heavily representative of these underrepresented populations. And so, the challenge now is, can we expand that, and can we capture those students, and can we make sure that those students are successful at our institution and help build the pipelines, right, that we already have with some of our existing high schools with those high schools, so that those students, as you were saying before, right, the students who are now at UT Dallas coming from those high schools go back to their high schools, go back to their communities and say, hey, I'm having a great experience. I've got great resources here at this institution. My friend, my friend's little brother, whatever the case may be, maybe you should try to come to UT Dallas as well. I think we, as a public institution, need to get out of our comfort zone and get more creative, as you said, with the programs and the outreach efforts that we have to these populations.
Chris, if you'll allow me to take a different twist, if you will, I think Rafael has spoken to kind of who we're serving, and maybe talk a little bit more in terms of how we're serving or how that is happening. And so I think part of it, let me also say that I think our good friends at Virginia Tech would be challenged by the very high ranking that you give us. And of course, that's what happens when you have public, you have that dynamic in-state competition. But what I wanted to say is, I think UVA is in this very unique position of kind of generational transition. We have a new president and provost in the last few years who happen to have been alums of the institution, and they are back. A significant number of our academic deans, in addition to myself, are new. After these deans have been here for 20 and 30 and sometimes close to 40 years. So you have generational leadership changes, I think, that are occurring in some of these institutions. And with that comes kind of a focus on clearly academic excellence and research, but also equity and stewardship of the resources as it relates to what are our contributions here, in the state. So I do think, and you can read this for yourself, that there are individuals who have said that UVA kind of has this elite private field. And so I think that part of the work that we're doing here as it relates to accessibility is we're looking to increase our numbers, particularly for, and this is stated in the strategic plan, with regard to historically underrepresented students. I was surprised, actually. I thought our African-American enrollment would have been a little bit higher, given that Virginia is so much more, I think, socioeconomically diverse than some of the other southern states. But I think when you look at our strategic plan and where we're going between now and 2030, you have new leadership, but you have leadership that is very committed, to the traditions and the research excellence and academic excellence that the institution has been known for. But I think that here in the state of Virginia, I think we're getting more students from Northern Virginia. We have a greater percentage of out-of-state students, I know, than we have at UNC. So there is a little more of a national feel at times when you're talking with groups of students. So I think that many institutions, and if you'll allow me to make a Morehead link, I probably would not be in higher ed if it were not for Holden's work. I had a conversation with Holden when he was leaving for WashU, and offered to be of help as it related to any strategies that the institution was working on related to student success, because that's what I had spent 10 years doing in the school system there in the state of North Carolina, and had no grand visions with regard to higher ed. But after having a conversation with him, it was he and several others who kind of opened my eyes to the idea that we need people like you, people who are out there practicing in some way, possibly not with a PhD, but lots of other life or business experiences that you can bring into the classroom or that you can bring onto a college campus and help to scale some of these programs for us. So I think how leadership at our institutions of higher ed are thinking about the way forward and who needs to be in our classrooms and how we title them and what credentials they need are going to become increasingly important as we look to create college first-year classes that will be some combination of in-person as well as hybrid. But I do think there are going to be some doors opening and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and these institutions looking more like the states and like the country will become a greater priority.
Thank you, Robyn. At this point in time, I think I'd love to take it to questions from the audience. Will Clayton, I'd love to hear from you.
Hey guys, thanks. This is really interesting, and I appreciate hearing these perspectives. And Rafael, we're gonna have to meet up. I just moved to Dallas and got settled last week, so I'll be reaching out to you.
Awesome. Love to buy you a beer.
Thanks. Take you up on that. For several years now, and kind of before the pandemic, I've been anticipating this transition of increased competition from kind of ubiquitous online digital higher education competitors that aren't burdened with the expenses of a campus and providing all the stimulation of the campus union and the sports and the athletics, but somebody that's looking to get access to elite education and maybe can't afford the traditional pedigrees would increasingly be able to get that, which is something I've been excited about for years and years. But I think I've always seen two barriers to that. One is actually like creating a pedigree that's worth something in the true social capital of our society. And I think in the pandemic, we've seen the second part of that, which is there are real technological barriers to getting that education when you're restricted to the kind of format you're in, being digital and online. And I'm curious, like in this area, in this time period of acceleration during the pandemic, what has been your perspectives on the competition from that space? Has it increased because these guys, everybody's online, it's a level playing field and they've figured it out better? Or has it decreased because it's really proven that it's very difficult to do this and people are wanting to get back in person, or some other factors that I haven't really considered? So, feel free, any of the three of you may have perspectives on that.
I mean, maybe I'll hop in. I think that's a question, Will, a lot of folks have been asking for a while as well. So the real barrier is actually accreditation and funding regimes. So how Title IV money flows to institutions, right? So you've seen ever since before the age of the MOOCs, the massive open online courses, you'd see experimentation there, and it would never quite get to a tipping point scale that you'd need. Because in the digital world versus the analog, right, you use the data to improve, right? Like the old school version of higher education says greater scale means lower quality, right? But a digital way of thinking would say, no, actually greater scale can increase the quality because you're learning rapidly using machine learning, et cetera. But the innovators in that space could not get access to the lifeblood of higher education delivery, which is federal funding. They've done that because of a lot of issues of bad actors in the space. Some of the people who first went to some of the kind of digital modalities were some of your for-profit colleges that invested, in some cases, 30, 50% of their funding in marketing, right? So they were basically, in some cases, predatory, right? And they were not delivering on value. They weren't all bad actors, but basically the federal government said, we're going to put you all into this area. And so you're not going to have access to funding from that dimension. That has been a fundamental issue within this space. However, what I'd argue is changing. There's a few things changing over the past 5 years. So one, you're actually seeing the business models of higher education fundamentally change. So you look at a place like Arizona State University. I don't even call that a university anymore. I consider that an enterprise. It has multiple arms doing all kind of crazy stuff over the country. They're doing partnerships as early as 10 years ago with Starbucks to basically get, working employees access to online education. And you're doing it in that case from a, public institution with accreditation, with some brand. And so they're finding ways to go in and then engage with charter school networks. And they're just crossing all kind of boundaries. I think actually that's where we're going to see some of the disruption, because it flies low enough below the radar of the federal government, which in many cases it said online is bad or this or that, because they actually are building off of an existing structure that folks know about. The second thing that I would add is and both Robyn and Rafael have mentioned this a little bit so far, is the pandemic produced the first time that many faculty members have ever engaged in their own pedagogy. Full stop. Not online. I mean, full stop. Right? They were trained to research the heck out of a very small corner of the universe and know more about it than anyone else. They were not trained necessarily to teach. And so what's happened is, in this period when they're looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, well, how do I deliver education? They're doing it in the context of the technology. That's actually the stuff that produces better outcomes. It's not the technology. It's the combination of those. And so you also have a workforce who is engaging, previously did not want to engage, not writ large, but at scale, did not want to engage. They're engaging more deeply in that. And so I think that's another thing we're looking at. And then finally, what I would argue here is you're going to see some disruption coming from not the for-profit space, not the existing, but the connectivity to workforce. So you look at companies like Guild Education, which is a unicorn $1 billion organization. They basically figure out with current workers at Taco Bell, at Walmart, at other places, how can we connect you to accredited universities? They're creating this bridge thing. And then we're going to add in some resources. We're going to add in some of the student supports that are going to help you make it through this. And so I think what we're ultimately going to see, I don't think it's just like a full-on pivot to, okay, now everybody's going to do digital and it's going to be disrupted. I think we're going to see a lot of heterogeneity in the space, like all kinds of new models emerging over the next few years. But I'd be curious, Robyn and Rafael, what are you seeing from your perch in your, I think it's different in different regions as well.
Yeah, I would agree, Patrick. To me, I think it's a little bit, there's a difference in value propositions between a traditional university and kind of an online exclusively university. And our experience is that there's still a great deal of demand for that traditional in-person experience. And I cite the evidence at our institution primarily from the number of international students that we have applying to our university, right? These are students for whom it would probably be much easier to get an online degree, right, from their home country. But they choose to come here sometimes at great expense, because these are not in-state students. They're paying full freight at our public institutions, right? But they choose to come here and pursue their degrees because they see a value in that in-person component, in the networking that's available at high quality American universities that doesn't exist in a lot of the other spaces, and certainly I don't think exists in the same way at online institutions. Now, that's not to say that this is an either or proposition. I think it's an and proposition. I think there is value in online institutions and some of the programs that they offer, right? And I think we're starting to work out where they might be able to add more value than a traditional in-person institution, right? I mean, we have got literally billions of dollars invested in buildings, right, and infrastructure that is necessary to support, at an R1 institution, the research enterprise, right? I mean, the chem labs and the bioengineering, and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, right? That you may not need if you want to offer a master's of accounting degree, for example, right? So I think there is still kind of a learning process that we're going through, an experimentation process that we're going through to try to determine where the most value is added from traditional universities and from online universities. And we'll see that kind of work out over the next decade or so.
Well, I think I was fascinated by your use of the word pedigree. And so I looked that up in dictionary.com while I was sitting here. And so I do think that is also part of the discussion, is how important is pedigree when young people, or especially their parents, are thinking about the institutions where they will enroll. For some families, pedigree will be important. For others, it will not. I think about a student who's going to enroll in Davidson College. They would never enroll in Arizona. It's just a different, it's what you're looking for, or you think you're looking for, in your student experience. So I do think pedigree is something we have to think about. I think about pedigree also in light of the fact that the overwhelming majority of students in North Carolina may not be competitive enough to be admitted to a UNC Chapel Hill. But there are families out there that would tell you being a third generation graduate of North Carolina A&T or North Carolina Central is just as much pedigree for them as it is if you were a second or third generation graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. So I think pedigree is one part of it. The other thing is, because I've been trying to think of Morehead examples for the last month or two, and I'll say this with regard to the online experience. I had the good fortune of being in a sophomore honors class with the Garth Dunklin. Now, he and I were about as on opposite sides of the political spectrum as you can imagine. I think the experience of having gotten to know Garth Dunklin online and in person across the table would have been a very, very different experience. Now, first of all, I didn't even know UNC had an honors program. I was delighted to grade into it and get a letter saying, you're in the sophomore honors program. And so I landed there in a class with 4 people, one of whom was Garth. And we must have thought the other was on another planet as we took this course called Political Socialization. So I have thought of that class often because I might not have come into contact with Garth of Kappa Alpha lore and all of his political affiliations, because we simply socialized and interacted in different communities at the institution. But every time we saw each other, we had great conversations. We understood that we thought differently. And after this political socialization course, that we grew up very differently in terms of how we came to kind of what our political interests were. And so that's the other thing I think about when I think about the student experience or working in student affairs is how do you convey, how institutions convey to students kind of what the life of a student is outside the classroom. And again, if you are a single mom or if you're an older student, that's just not part of your formula. You are trying to get the hours as quickly as you can in order to get the credential or the badge so that you can move up if you're working at FedEx or wherever you're working. So I do think, to Patrick's point, the offerings will become more heterogeneous and diverse because college students are becoming more diverse and their needs are more diverse. And I think for those who have the luxury of thinking about the alumni organizations and the kinds of things they want to be connected to after graduating from college, that is a unique experience that not many individuals will have the luxury to indulge in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. Brian, I'd love to send it over to you.
Hey, Brian Hassel, class of '88, fascinating discussion. thinking about students who don't have a Morehead-Cain, don't have family wealth. So a lot of students, what are they doing in college? Often they're working. And a few things about these jobs, they're probably not being paid very well. It's completely stacked on top of their schooling. So it's a big time suck. And it's not probably on a career path for them. And so I'm wondering about opportunities to use the fact that a lot of students need to work more productively. And I just want to give one example, and I'd love to hear if there are other examples from the panel. But in my world, K-12, we're working with a group of many schools that are creating hundreds of jobs for college students who want to be teachers. Actually, this is being supported by another wing of Patrick's foundation. And so these students are spending their senior year working in a K-12 school. They're making a lot more money than they would make at Starbucks. They are, it's not stacked on top of their college because they're getting credit for doing this. And then finally, they're actually learning to teach from a master teacher while they have their senior year. So it's on the track of their career. And so I'm wondering, are there opportunities, more opportunities to use the work that students really have to do if they don't have a scholarship or family money? Can we use that more effectively to help them get a leg up in their future career?
I think there's, Brian, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on higher education to do exactly that. Right. I don't even know if I would put that in the camp of, hey, this is an opportunity. I think that the bar is going to be raised for higher education on that, because what we see right now, even through the federal work study programs, they don't have to have any relevance to what that individual student wants to do with their life, which means like, okay, yeah, did I make $15 an hour, $10 an hour, wherever the case may be? Sure. Was that helpful? Yeah, but you missed out on all these other potential benefits, building social capital in a space that's relevant to you, fueling your passions, right? Like, so I think we're going to see a big push. And I think some institutions are going to brand themselves strongly on that. You already see that to some degree in places like Georgia Tech that have for a long time had externships with kind of local, from the engineering side, local engineering companies. That is an expected part of the experience. And I think there's going to be more and more of that. I think, one of the questions I have related to that and Chris's previous question about the role of Morehead-Cain is, if we take, let's take for granted for a moment that higher education is in a period of massive change. Let's also take for granted for a moment that Morehead-Cain scholars love to lead and are creative. And you put those two things together. And I have a live example of where that happened well before this, right? So Andy Powell, who I think was class 2015, scholar class of 2015, I think he partially ran for student body president talking about improving teaching and learning. He was doing this work with biology teachers who were doing flipped classrooms, blended classrooms, saying, let's lean in with you and let's make sure that that kind of learning, where we're getting higher quality than just sitting in a, kind of a lecture for 45 minutes, that's what we get. So like, what if you unleash Morehead-Cain students on the problems of the current university, right? Like, they're not all going to go into that, right? So we're not all going to be the Robyn Hadleys of the world, say, I took this path and then I talked to Holden Thorpe and he took me over here. But there's a lot of relevant experiences, right? Folks who want to do coding, there's a lot of coding opportunities as it pertains to some of the digital learning stuff. They want to engage in different kind of discourse with different types of leaders across. There's opportunities to do that. They want to structure experiences like what Robyn mentioned, where everyone gets to experience their kind of, wall of China moment or wherever that case may be. We can be creative there. And so like, I think we have some untapped resources to the benefit of UNC Chapel Hill in the Morehead-Cain current classes of scholars. Now, they do that on their own, right? You look at creating new programs, leading existing programs, but with a little bit of nudging, it doesn't take a lot, but with a little bit of nudging, and you look at the summer experiences, how they're structured and what our scholars go and do, they can do some pretty interesting stuff on campus. Probably more interesting and relevant than the job that I did have while I was a Morehead-Cain scholar, which was a parking deck guard for about 15 hours a week down in the health sciences area. But anyway, I think that's coming to a theater near us, no matter what, in terms of the relevant work experience, Brian.
I would just add, Brian, it sounds like I love the program that you described. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for our students to do more and learn more, especially for universities like ours that is in the midst of a big urban area. I mean, there are tons of problems that could be measurably improved if there were programs in place to bring our students and have them apply their skills or just their presence, right, in a lot of situations. If we had some sort of, you know, state or federal level service program, right, where you dedicated, you know, 10, 15 hours a week during your college career, and you got, you know, Pell level funding for that service. I mean, I think that would do a tremendous amount of good, both for the students and for the communities in which they serve.
Greg, can we send it over to you?
Yes, thank you. And first, I want to give a tip of the hat to the Foundation for the Mentoring Mentee Program. As other people have said, you know, we mentors, which I'm doing for the first time with a current scholar, get a lot out of it. And that's the direction I want to take your question, Chris, which was, you know, who is the university serving? What's the population served? But it's also who can serve the university, and this mentor opportunity is just a piece of it. I think there are folks like myself. I mean, I'm at the end of my career, let's say, and now is when I want to do all sorts of exploring. And that's what I spent, well, 5 years at UNC doing. I was the class of 79 and 80 because I spent a year in Germany. I came to UNC as a French and history major, and I left as an econ major focused on malnutrition. So you can imagine the transition. But for me, it was a great gift to be able to do all the exploring that Morehead-Cain allowed me to do, that the university allowed me to do. And I think I would love to do that now. And there are universities, yes, that let older folks attend, classes. But I think as much as anything else, it's having that one-to-one connection with students today and what they get, and be part of the academic learning, that learning quad that includes more than just the 18 to 26 realm, and not just staff or faculty, but maybe alums, the way the Morehead-Cain Foundation is doing. So it's lifelong learning on steroids, I would guess, in that it gives back to the university as well.
I love it. I don't know if people have examples of how they're pulling alumni and thinking about not only who does the university serve, but who serves the university. I think that's powerful framing for us as we imagine the future of Morehead-Cain. I also am so impressed by the mentorship program, and I shared this with the trustees a few weeks ago. First, the mentorship program is the most attended activity or event that we have amongst our scholar body. You know, we do lots of things. They're virtually all optional. More students are enrolled and actively participating in the mentorship program than anything else we put on, which is fascinating to me. But two, we see from the delivery of the mentorship program, which is masterfully put together by Emily Olson, that both mentors and mentees report these extraordinary experiences that help them see the world differently, and I think foster a kind of intergenerational connection that we could argue is harder to foster today in funny ways than it maybe has been in a really long time. And so I really love that. I really love that framing, and I think it's something that we need to continue to look at as our conception of the program and in our role as a source of innovation for the university. Howard.
I'm in awe of and appreciate the opportunity to hear these experts in higher education and institutions speak. I'm going to ask some naive questions as a retired practicing physician living in Atlanta. but my expertise came from taking two sons around applying to colleges about 10, 15 years ago, and learned a lot. One of the questions that you touched on, all the speakers touched on, I'd like to understand a little bit better. I'm confused, is the obligation of flagship state universities to their state versus national. And you talked about that a little bit, but didn't really get into it a lot. I remember when I was taking one of my sons to UNC, there was an 87% in-state admission and 13% out-of-state. At Virginia, and I remember these statistics, it was 67% in-state and 33%. And that had an effect on people coming from Georgia applying to schools. And if the goal is to meet the needs of your state, that's a different initiative than meeting the needs nationally. So I'd like to get some comment on that. The other thing I'd like, and this is I'm not trying to be political at all, I'm curious about your take on the notion of free tuition for community colleges and what role that plays in higher education, in Morehead-Cain, and in the initiative and the goals of public universities. So these are naive questions, but from someone who doesn't do this every day, but I'd love to get your responses on that.
I think they're great. And I see that Rafael's already geared up to answer.
Yeah, so Howard, I would say, we view our role both to serve the people of our state, but also to serve the nation, perhaps in slightly different ways. So as a research university, we view our research mission in the national context, primarily because we compete nationally for research funding from the federal government, right? From the NIH, from the NSF. And so we need to view ourselves in that context. And when we're competing for faculty, that's the context and the environment that we're in, the arena that we're playing in. But we recognize that our role as an educational institution, our primary responsibility is to the citizens of this state, right? And to provide opportunities for our state citizens to advance their education, to enhance economic mobility for the citizens of our state. And so it's really a dual role that we have. And to a certain extent, and I say this only slightly tongue in cheek, but to serve as a symbol of pride for your state too, right? I mean, that sometimes I think, one of the primary considerations is you've got to have, at least one athletic program in the top 25 of the AP poll, right? And that's not because it enhances the educational mission of the institution, but because it serves as an indicator to your populace that, you are a source of pride for your state. And that's not to be discounted, frankly, too much. We can argue the role of athletics, at American institutions of higher education, but it clearly has served a purpose over the course of our history, and is essentially part of our mission to serve as a highlight and a point of pride for the citizens of the state.
Thank you.
I do think, I think it's both and I think every state, is different. And I think to the degree that you're inextricably linked to state, the state political system. We have a new governor in Virginia, and those appointments for our boards, likewise in North Carolina and other states, are important. So clearly you're focused on the resources that come to you from the state level, as well as the political machinations that determine who sits on your board. At the same time, I think to Rafael's point, you are looking nationally at how you're ranked and how you influence certain spaces, whether it's our comm school, an entrepreneur, or whether it's our medical school. You're focusing on both and I think again the differential, in out-of-state students speaks to varying political climate in the state of Virginia and North Carolina. If I could use one other example, I can remember when I was working in the K through 12 space in North Carolina, there was this one flagship from the Deep South that just kept showing up. Wherever you were in North Carolina, they were there at the college fair. And I kept saying, why are they, traveling up and down the East Coast? Long story short, that particular institution basically said, we can't grow quick enough from our native population. And we've got to move into areas that may have traditionally looked at our state in a not so positive way. And we've got to make our state and our institution more palatable to others. And we're going to do it by ratcheting up our academic programs, but we're also going to do it by lowering our tuition. And so I think it's a formula. And what I used to always tell parents when I was advising students and families in the high school space is that it's not a magic formula, but it is a formula in terms of the college application process, the scholarship application process, and in turn, universities, and I think flagship universities are looking at the same thing. I think years ago, Morehead could count on those valedictorians coming to UNC if they were selected. You can't count on that. And likewise with Jefferson, the Jefferson program, you can't count on that because there's so many opportunities, offered by both public and private universities. So I think it is both, and we're attuned to both whatever the state political environment is, as well as what's going on nationally and what's going on again in the economy.
Yeah, I think Robyn and Rafael covered off nicely on the kind of state and national expectations. I'll try to lightly handle the political football that is the free community college movement. To some degree, at a federal level, that's not on the docket right now anymore. That is no longer part of Build Back Better. That said, I don't think the idea is done. I think you see that happening already in multiple states, red states and blue states. Actually, Tennessee was one of the innovators on the kind of 2 years of free community college under a Republican governor. And you see that predominantly more in kind of communities, cities, and regions that lean a bit more progressive. And I do think that idea or that topic will come up at the federal level many more times again in the future, and will continue to come up at the state level. I think, you could look at it a few different ways. One of them is almost like a philosophical, what is a public good in this country? And I'm just going to take the economic lens for a moment. And when you look at the job recovery after the Great Recession, and that 96% of those jobs went to people with some form of post-secondary credential, and you look at who was more insulated from the recent job loss during COVID, it was also folks with some form of post-secondary credential. I think it's pretty hard to argue that it is not a requirement to thrive in society today. And when that comes up, I have to look at that personally as a public good. Now that's like, everyone has their own politics on like what should be a quote unquote public good. I believe education up until the 40s and 50s, when education through high school would get you that stepping stone that you need, and education was a public good. And you saw that go across the country. The case now is at a minimum, you need an associate's degree if you want to participate meaningfully in the economy. Unless you're, my boss, Bill Gates, who did not finish his degree, but did okay. And I think the second question that comes up in the whole free community college thing is like, is that actually a regressive policy, or how should we look at that? And I'll leave that up for smarter individuals than myself. But I really do believe a version of that. And I think there are versions of that are being pushed in the 4-year space, which is like, well, no, don't just make it free community college. It should be the first 2 years so that student has flexibility on where they go and apply that. I believe we need that when you just look at what it takes to get ahead in this world, or for upward economic mobility. But again, it's off the docket right now at the federal level. I do think it is still very much on the docket at certain localities, and will probably pop up in the federal government again sometime in the next 4 to 6 years.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say, I think our community colleges are a tremendously undervalued resource, and one that we in in the four-year PhD granting environment need to do more to support and leverage, right? Because they provide a tremendous amount of value for our students. That they can dramatically decrease the cost of acquiring a four-year degree for students that start their first 2 years at a community and then transfer to us at a four-year institution. And we need to do more to make those opportunities, more widely known and get more students into that pipeline so that they can hopefully be successful and not saddle themselves with the levels of debt that we've seen, kind of explode over the last decade.
I think everyone who's sat through this conversation knows now why I've had so much fun thinking about this panel with Rafael and Robyn and Patrick over the past couple of weeks. And I'm also struck that we actually have a university president who's been sitting through and listening intently to the whole conversation, in Brian Lewis, who's the president of Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky. And I think I'd be remiss before we go to not offer Brian a chance to share any particular sort of closing reflections, ideas you heard today, things that you're particularly excited about as you look toward the post-pandemic university.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Good to be with you all. Great to see some familiar faces. Fascinating conversation, and I just found myself nodding along and saying ditto 1,000 times to the excellent points that were being made. Transylvania is in a slightly different kind of space. We are a small private. We're only about 1,000 students. We go back to 1780, so we're actually even older than Carolina. We were the first college west of the Alleghenies. But the point that I don't know that it really got captured today that seems to be at the forefront for us is that with all the challenges that everybody's talking about, what we're really trying to focus on is prepare students for what Daniel Pink called the conceptual age. If you sort of accept that we've gone from the agricultural age to the industrial age, now in the information age, but moving to the conceptual age. And that what we really need to do is prepare students, not just for that first job and that first career, but that third or fourth career they're going to have 30 years from now that doesn't even exist today. And I see a disconnect in the public discourse between a lot of public policymakers who are saying, prepare people for that first job, but they're not thinking about the tools that they're going to need to keep adapting. And I think that if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we need to be able to continually adapt and pivot. As Benjamin Franklin said, when you're finished changing, you're finished. And clearly the institutions that Rafael and Robyn are a part of and the kind of work that Patrick's doing, they're not finished, and Transylvania certainly isn't finished either. But I think that's getting that message through to prospective students and parents that, in fact, a small liberal arts school can potentially be the best vehicle to prepare you for that. That's sort of our main challenge in this environment.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone who's chosen to join us today. Robyn kicked us off by describing the purpose of college as skills, tools, and resources for a democratic society. And I think that we can add to that skills, tools, and resources to lead in a democratic society in the conceptual age. And I hope and believe that we're doing that at Morehead-Cain, and look forward to continuing conversations over the course of this week at our alumni mini forum, and also seeing you in Chapel Hill for the big forum next year, and to meeting many of you in person for the first time. Tomorrow, we will have a 7 talk, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern. It'll be by Amir Barzin from the class of 2006. He is the director of the UNC Family Medicine Center, and what that has meant is that he has been overseeing UNC's response to COVID-19, including his name being on tens of thousands of COVID tests that have been taken on this campus since the month of August, in a remarkable operation. So I look forward to hearing from Amir and learning from his story tomorrow at 4, and to continuing on the explorations of this week with all of you. Thank you so much for joining. To our panelists, Robyn, Patrick, Rafael, thank you for enlightening all of us today. And I look forward to working with all of you to define the future of Morehead-Cain.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you all. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Great to see you.